As I mentioned in the beginning, I actually love to pray on some of these readings because, like I said, having spent 20 years in Egypt and been to the Holy Land about a dozen times, along with driving, it was my first time. I rented a car and drove from Jerusalem all the way up to Tiberias and then over to Nazareth and then down to Tel Aviv and back over, and all in one day. So you realize how small that area is. But I basically have to start out by explaining what Maryknoll is. And it's amazing because at every Mass up until now, in most places wherever I visit, if we're over 50 and we're white hairs, gray hairs, no hairs, dyed hairs, fake hairs, almost anyone 50 and above knows what Maryknoll is because we were a household word. We used to get the magazine, which came out every month, either in our Catholic schools or it just came through the mail to our houses. And like I say, we still put it out, but it's not a monthly now, it's a quarterly. And I have some by the exit, so I hope you'll take a copy or two when you leave. But Maryknoll is connected to North Carolinian history because one of our two co-founders, Thomas Frederick Price, was known as the Tar Heel Apostle. And 125 years ago, he basically rode on horseback or horse and buggy to evangelize this state as one of the few, except for a few of the Benedictines at Belmont Abbey, one of the few Catholic priests in this state back over a century ago. But anyway, in 1908, the Vatican said that the United States Church is no longer a mission-receiving church because it was finally self-sufficient in terms of priests and religious. So 3 years later, the U.S. bishops basically said, now it's time for us to become a mission-sending church. So they met with Thomas Frederick Price, who originally, I think, wanted to found Glen Mary for domestic missions, and James Anthony Walsh, the mission office director for Boston, who was focused totally on overseas missions. And the agreement was they would form the Catholic Foreign Mission Society of America, popularly known as Maryknoll, the Maryknoll Fathers and Brothers, the Maryknoll Sisters, the Maryknoll Lay Missioners. And so originally we were founded just to go to the Orient, starting with China and then Japan and the Philippines and Korea. And then the Second World War came along and we were tossed out of those countries, so we started going into Latin America and Africa. And over this 110 years of our existence since 1911, we've worked in about 30 different countries. But because of aging and lower numbers, that 30 has now become 20, but we still do the best we can with what we have. The unique part about Maryknoll, which is one of the reasons why I come to parishes, is unlike the Benedictines or the Dominicans or the Franciscans and most other groups, when we were founded, our constitutional said you will not have any institutional presence in the United States, and yet our whole base is the U.S. Church. So we don't have parishes like this. We don't have high schools like Charlotte Catholic. We don't have abbeys like Belmont. We don't have universities. We have nothing. And back when there was a deluge of vocations, if anyone said in a Catholic school or to a priest or a sister, I'd like to be a missioner, they'd say, go to Maryknoll. It was an automatic response. And over the years, like I said, we've gotten a little older and a little smaller because up until now, we've also never accepted vocations from overseas where we work, although we've started to open the door a crack with an experiment to see if we can't maybe somewhat replenish some of our numbers with overseas vocations like most dioceses. We do have an issue though. We've got over 100 seniors that have spent 20, 30, 40, 50, and even there's one or two that spent 60 years in overseas mission. And they're now back now in assisted living and skilled care. So not only do we ask for your prayers and hopefully donations to help us in our overseas mission work and projects, but if you have any idea what it's like to have a senior in skilled care or assisted living, you're talking about $75,000 to $100,000 a pop, and we've got 50 in each. We have 50 in skilled care and 50 in assisted living. And then someone like myself, who used to be robo-priest until he wiped out on a bicycle in Egypt almost 20 years ago, has had, like I mentioned, sliced and diced 10 times from the waist down. And so those operations cost a little bit along with cancer treatments and everything else. So we're talking about $10 million just on medical a year. So anyway, we do need your prayers, we need your donations, and we also need vocations from the U.S. Church. Priests, brothers, sisters, lay missioners. And one of the things that I always try to do to instill that idea of vocations is to get into my own. And so, for instance, I originally, as I mentioned, come from Western New York, a little dairy farm town. I went to a 4-room schoolhouse. And I can remember marrying old priest coming to our school when I was in 2nd grade, showing a film on Peru. But I kind of let that drift. And then I kind of thought of priesthood as a young kid. Then I went into high school, kind of dropped the whole idea. Then I kind of thought of it right as I was approaching my senior year, and actually for a short period of time entered the conventual Franciscans. And like Greg Hartmeyer, the Archbishop of Atlanta, in which this is part of that Metropolitan Archdiocese, we've known each other since he was 14 and I was 16, because we went on the same vocation retreat in 1966. But I gave up on that whole thing, and when I finished high school, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do after that, so I went in the U.S. Air Force for 4 years. And my first year was in the States, Lackland for basic, and Chinook Air Force Base for meteorology, and then the Latin American Forecast Center at Charleston. And then I got sent to Germany for 3 years with headquarters 2nd Weather Wing in Wiesbaden. And that's where it all started. I have to blame my Air Force experience, which started this whole thing, of giving me my nomadic fever. After that, you couldn't have kept me back in the States for love or money. So, and actually I had a second job on a horse farm in Germany, and I learned the language. And until 3 years ago, when the last person of that group and that family that owned the farm died, I was going back almost every year, either from the States or coming up from Kenya, where I spent 4 years, or coming up from Egypt. But the big thing is, when I came back from my Air Force, I went to University of Buffalo, majored in labor relations, and as soon as I got my degree, hopped on a plane, went back to Germany, and got a job in a hotel there. And then from there, got recruited to work in a hotel in Sharjah next to Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. And the reason why I bring this up is because that was my first experience of really enculturation, being out of my comfort zone, and discovering other religions, Hinduism and Islam, along with Christianity for a lot of Indian Christians from Sri Lanka and different parts of India. I started to rediscover my vocation after I'd even drifted away from the church. And when I came back to the States, the only thing I could think of is not just being a priest, but being a missionary priest. So I joined Marinol in '79, and the rest is history. But it's been one heck of a ride. Talk about roller coasters, emotional and spiritual. And I'd like to think that I at least convey at 72, 35 years as a priest and 42 years in Marinol, that I still have a certain passion and excitement when I get talking about mission, especially when I talk about mission in Egypt. When you go there, you don't go there to bring Jesus like a traditional missioner. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph lived there. The Church of Egypt was founded by Mark the Evangelist, so we're talking a first century church, along with, the churches of Syria and Palestine and Iraq and Jordan and different places like that. But Christians are basically suffering for being Christian. And so you support Christians staying Christian and Christians staying in Egypt. And there's still a tendency to ghettoize themselves. So you basically, my apostle is called Helping Egyptians Help Egypt. So I don't feel I'm the center of anything. But for instance, I helped to build and run Our Lady of Peace Home for Special Needs, and that was a Coptic Catholic Patriarchy project. I used to say Mass auf Deutsch in German for a German congregation of sisters who are mainly now German-speaking Egyptian sisters who run schools and clinics in Egypt. I used to basically say Masses for the Irish Franciscan Sisters of the Immaculate Conception. And I also taught in an all-Muslim, all-Palestinian school for 2 years to get a sense of the realities of Islam and the predicament of Palestinians. And so often there's two sides to that story, and we've only been told one side. I've heard the other side and seen the other side because I was in Jerusalem during the First Gulf War, and I worked with the peacekeeping forces in Sinai as part of Camp David as well. But the number one thing I got involved in was being part of formation education at St. Leo the Great Coptic Rite Catholic Seminary. And maybe some of us know, maybe some of us don't know, there are 22 liturgical churches in union with Rome, along with their much larger Orthodox counterparts. And in my 10 years there, which was scattered over the years from 1984 until probably 2008, and then when I went back after 4 years in Kenya, I was there with a different role, not in formation education, but I called it Sadiq al-Kahin. Sadiq al-Kahin is the name of a magazine which translates the friend of the priest. So when I was getting ready to come back to Egypt for my last 3 years before I came back for this, I said to the Coptic Catholic Patriarch, Cardinal Antonius Naguib, my new ministry is going to be Sadiq al-Kahin. He said, what's that supposed to mean? That's the name of a magazine. And I said, Sadiq al-Kahin Mutagessid, which means the incarnation of this magazine. I said, I want to visit my former seminarians that are now priests and find out how they're doing and help them with their projects and drop some cash on them if they need money for projects or to help individual people. And to this day, I still go back, but the pandemic pretty much made my last 2 trips go belly up. But one of the reasons why I keep that connection, and this is a little story I didn't tell in my other masses. Like I referred to, I wiped out on a bicycle in April of 2002. And I was just with a Coptic Catholic priest who was one of my students, who's the pastor in Nashville, Tennessee, and on the phone with 2 other ones on FaceTime that are in Egypt. And I fell in love with those seminarians, partly because of the accident. I could be pretty tough, but I was also extremely paternal. And so anyway, when I had my accident, and I came out of my surgery and came back from the hospital, they set up a room for me in what used to be one of the teachers' rooms on the ground floor because I couldn't do stairs. And I had my own little bathroom, and they had a roster where before morning prayer at 6 o'clock in the morning, one of them would come down taking turns. They had a sign-up sheet because if you've ever had hip surgery, you know you can't bend. So they would wash my legs from my knees down and my back. Sister Zaira, who was an Italian Cambodian sister, would walk in and say, Buongiorno, il caffè per favore. But the big thing too is then trying to carry books and go from classes, because I was still teaching using crutches and a walker. And I finally said, Feda Humar li mukun Sayidni, where's the donkey who can help me? And the big thing is, even this priest, after 20 years, still calls me Dudu. He doesn't call me Father Douglas or Abuna Douglas. He says, yeah, Dudu. And so anyway, the translation of Humar is donkey. So I had this team, and since one of my jobs was teaching Intro to Moral Theology and Intro to Church History, but also I started out teaching English for Theological Studies, because in Arabic, most of the stuff printed is actually Orthodox, so we have to teach and learn English, either English or French or German or Italian, in order to read the theology books, especially if you're professors. So anyway, they formed this group called Donkeys for Dudu. And those guys to this day will call me, and when I go to Egypt, I still visit them. And when I had to go back for surgery number 2, the second of 6, because I got a bone infection, I'm trying to do the Coptic Mass because I'm by ritual, and I'm standing behind the altar. And normally the priest has his back with an iconostas, but I always had my face to the seminarians, and I'm just bawling my eyes out because I really fell in love with those guys. And one of the guys who I had as a seminarian and then became a priest, and now he's a bishop of Luxor, when he came to teach just 1 year, and I was there for 10, he says, how do you do it? I said, I think of myself as their father. I said, I try to form and educate them the way I would form and educate one of my sons to be a responsible adult that not only has content, what's right and what's wrong, but has a methodology, because there's no such thing as a black and white world. And so you not only have content, you have to have a methodology to apply that content to a real situation. Anyway, I've already talked too long, but when I get started, I can't stop. So if you want to talk more, we'll talk out in the vestibule. But the important thing is this idea of being a missioner, of feeling at home and having family, not just friends and acquaintances in this country halfway around the world. And we do that. I was on the phone with another guy who's been in Nepal for 30 years, who's my age. Another one who just got back from China. This is mission, this is passion. This is basically exercising your muscles as a church, as a missionary, not just as a priest. And I sometimes say, as anyone else in the world, I'm born as a human being. And then I live my humanness as an American and as a Christian. And I live my Christianity as a Catholic. I live my Catholicism as a priest. I live my priesthood as a missionary, and I live my missionary priesthood as a married old priest. And so as I close, I would just invite you to do the same thing, or at least encourage someone in this parish or in your family to do the same. I apologize for talking too long. This is my life. God bless you all. Please be supportive of Marital in that second collection. Please take a magazine as you go out, and not only pray for us, but maybe think about joining us. God bless you all, and let us now stand for the creed.